Dude, thank you, Mom. It's not raining or anything, is it?
Yes, sir. I have a dead battery. I'll be back in 3 minutes.
Oh, wait. Just waiting on a battery. I think that's called Murphy's Law.
Sheriff, will you be using that at all, you know?
No, Lieutenant Petray will probably be using it.
I will be. The PowerPoint, the monitor, will you be showing it anywhere? You will.
Breathe. You got your audio?
Say one more thing.
You check.
Thank you.
All right, we'll get started. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. I wanted to bring news of 3 cold cases that we've been working on. One of these cases occurred in 1981, another one in 1990, and another one in 1996. Before we get into any details of that, I just want to give thanks to our Benton County prosecutor and his office and their work in this, Arkansas Crime Lab, Authorum Labs, and particular credit to our CID, and in that matter, a lot of credit, all the credit honestly needs to go to Lieutenant Petray for his ongoing effort into solving these cases that have been at this office for many, many years. One of the particular cases, he'll talk about all 3 of them in detail for you. This all came about through the years with your basic investigations, and then along came DNA through the years. We tried that method several different times, unable to identify the victims in these particular cases. With changes in technology, there's a process for testing DNA. It was called genetic genealogy that is very new, and I'll let Hunter talk about that in detail, but through that method, we were able to identify potential family members of the victims in these cases. And with that, we were able to identify who these individuals are finally, after all these years, who they are, and hopefully we'll be able to give some closure to the family members who have often probably wondered where their family member went all these years, and our prayers go out to them. Hopefully we will be able to bring justice in all 3 of these cases. And with that, Nathan, you want to speak?
Well, thank you all very much for being here. I just want to thank Sheriff Holloway, Lieutenant Petray for great work in these cases. You know, cold cases are ones that, you know, there's a lot of documentaries done about them because they're very difficult to solve. They're very difficult to identify what happened. Take a lot of work and effort, and so we were very happy to partner with the Sheriff's Office in funding the DNA testing through the Othram laboratories. And it's just very pleasing today that the Sheriff's Office is able to give some semblance of closure, at least in identifying who these folks are, to the families of Fred Groh, Donna Nelton, and John Rollins. And I know that through the presentation you're going to see today, you'll hear that this is just the first step that the Sheriff's Office is going to take in investigating these cases and going forward. These cases are from respectively 1981, 1990, and 1996. And so it just shows you the hard work and effort that the Sheriff's Office puts into investigating these. And I confirm today these are the only unidentified bodies that the Sheriff's Office has or had before this. And so they're going to continue going forward on this. And I just think they deserve a lot of credit, and I think the community is in your debt for working on this. All right? Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I've got a little bit of a cold, so I'll try to do my best. I just want to thank again the sheriff. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that his commitment to pushing these cold cases forward, to trying to solve these cold cases, you know, allowing me, myself, the Criminal Investigation Division to work these cases when we have free time is really appreciated. And I know the families, because it's easy to forget about these cold cases. So, and I know that I've done stories with just about every media outlet here several times over on all of these cases. So it's a little bit exciting today to be able to get some headway and make some progress on these. Got a little PowerPoint. We're going to kind of go through all those. We'll go through each case one by one, and we'll try to do our best. So again, we're going to talk about 3 cases today, and like the sheriff mentioned, they're all 3 unidentified remains cold cases. The first case we're going to talk about is from 1981, and I also want to mention, you know, the sheriff brought up Othram, so we partnered with Othram Incorporated. They're basically a private lab that develops DNA profiles based off of trace amounts of DNA, contaminated, degraded. They're able to amplify that and develop DNA profiles. And then they're also able to help with the genealogy phase, and I'll kind of get into that as well. I know you all have probably seen it on the news, genetic genealogy. It's also known as forensic genealogy. Basically, it's combining the process of DNA with genealogy to be able to identify not only victims but suspects as well. You know, it's the same technology that was used to catch the Golden State Killer. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. You see it on the news every day. So as I go through the slides, we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so the first case is 1981. In the summer, it occurred out in the Garfield area. If any of you guys are familiar with Garfield, this happened near the Roberts Loop area. So victim was shot, dumped in a wooded area, field near the railroad tracks. These are original crime scene photos. So at the time, victim was estimated to be between the ages of 20 and 40. So in 2016, and let me just back up, you have to remember that in 1981, DNA was not a thought, okay? DNA was not used in law enforcement. It was not used to identify victims. It was not even used in crime scenes. That didn't come along until like 1987. So this is all pre-DNA. So in 2016, we did a case review of this entire case, and we decided to resubmit evidence to the crime lab. They had some hair, luckily, that they collected on an autopsy, and we sent that back down, and unfortunately unsuccessful. So in 2019, we approached the Arkansas Crime Lab about using genealogy in cold cases. Okay, so at that time, the response that we got was they're just not able to do that. Okay, they don't have the capability. And it's not something that they're doing wrong, they just don't have that capability at this point in time. So what we did is, remember in '81 DNA was not around, so they actually sent the remains back to us and the victim was buried in an unmarked grave. So we had to try to locate the victim in this homicide. So luckily we were able, with the help of the coroner's office, we were able to locate the victim in an unmarked grave over in the Bentonville Cemetery. I applied for an exhumation order, and we went over there, and I think some of you covered it at that point in time. Pictures of the exhumation. We sent the body back down to the crime lab, and again, they were only at this time able to get a partial DNA profile, not a full DNA profile, which did not help us a lot. So fast forward a couple of years later, March 2021, we met with Othram Incorporated. Communicated with the crime lab. They were more than willing to assist us in shipping the remains to Othram. So we had that done. March of this year, about a year later, Othram was able to develop a DNA profile of the victim. At that point in time, a couple months after that, they were able to identify a close familial match and the possible identity of the victim in this case. So in August of 2022, I made contact with the relative, got DNA and compared it against the victim, and it showed to be a genetic match. So in this case, after 41 years, the victim was identified as Fred James Grow, better known to his friends and family as Jamie Grow. 33-year-old victim, originally from Colorado, had been missing out of Fayetteville. So Jamie, a little bit about him. He had been working and basically living in Fayetteville. He was somewhat lived the hippie lifestyle according to his family, which you gotta remember, this is late 70s, early 80s. We know through investigation that he left on a planned trip back to Colorado on June 3rd of 1981. Prior to leaving, Jamie was approached by two females needing a ride to Oregon. Okay, Jamie apparently was only willing to give them a ride part of the way. And the two females who have been identified by us had been residing at the Sassafras and Rainbow communes in Newton County, Arkansas. And they were last seen by a witness loading their belongings into Jamie's van prior to leaving Fayetteville. Okay, so for now, and when we conclude, I'll talk about all three cases, but let's move to the next case. So the next case is from 1990, occurred over in Maysville. Jane Doe, if anybody is familiar with Maysville, even to this day, it's still a pretty remote, rural area, especially back in 1990. Crime scene photos from back then. It's a wooded, heavily wooded area, as you can see in the photos, with a pond in the middle. Okay, the victim in this case had been shot, had gasoline poured on her, and then she was set on fire. Okay, really violent crime. Estimated at the time to be 25 to 35 years old. In 95, a facial reconstruction was attempted, but it was determined that it would not be possible due to the extensive damage. Okay. 1995, evidence again was resubmitted to the crime lab for a DNA profile. Again, unsuccessful. In 2008, the remains were sent to the University of North Texas, and they were able to get a mitochondrial DNA profile, which is good, but it's still very limited. And that's what you get from your mother's side of the family. 2017, I began a case review. Again, we compared multiple dental records. Again, no success. 2019, communicated with the crime lab. Due to her being burned with gasoline, crime lab felt that they had very little hope of getting a DNA profile in this case. Met with Othram. Again, lab more than willing to ship the remains to Othram. We did so. September of 21, Othram able to develop the profile. August of this year, they were able to locate a distant relative. Same month, we made contact with that relative who provided us with a family history. However, they were unaware of anybody in their family missing. So after researching family history, we were able to determine a possible identity of the victim. So we reached out to one of the victims, who we thought the victim was, reached out to one of the siblings, who in fact confirmed that they were missing a family member since 1989. Last month, September, we compared the relative's DNA with the unidentified victim, and it showed to be a genetic match. So in this case, after 32 years, we've identified the victim as Donna Sue Nelton, 28-year-old victim, okay, originally from Arkansas, but living in the Kansas City, Missouri area. Just a few photos of Donna Sue. Okay, in this case, I want to talk about briefly an individual by the name of George Alvin Bruton. Okay, George was Donna's boyfriend at the time. Okay, both of them were known, according to family, to pass through Benton County. They were both also known to frequent an RV park in Jay, Oklahoma, known as the Pine Island RV Park. It should be noted that at the crime scene in 1990, there was a flyer from the Pine Island RV Park found, which at that point in time served no significance, but obviously later on you see the importance that it plays. George Bruton had spent time on the FBI's most wanted list. In 1979, he shot 2 officers in Utah, held 2 families hostage, was sent to prison. He paroled back out in 1988. Again, came under investigation in 1989 for drug offenses. At this point in time, Donna Sue had simply vanished. Federal agents saw Bruton and another associate throwing away items in a dumpster. When they searched the dumpster, it was all of Donna Sue's belongings. Her vehicle was also located in a storage unit used by Bruton. And in 1990, a source indicated that Bruton had admitted to killing a, quote, Donna. Okay. Federal agents at that point in time searched for 4 days on Bruton's land in Missouri and were unable to locate anything. So the case for them basically went cold as far as her disappearance. Bruton was eventually sentenced to 2 life sentences in 1990 for drug offenses, and he is deceased, died in prison in 2008. So that's basically the synopsis of the second case. So the third case we have, which everybody is familiar with, happened in '96. Victim located in Beaver Lake. If you're familiar with the lake, this is the area of Railroad Cut, just a little bit south of Montanay. Original crime scene photos. You can see the bluffs in the photos. Victim was found floating in a sleeping bag that had possibly been weighted down at some point in time. Victim had been in the lake for 3 months to approximately a year in time. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly how long he'd been in the lake. In 1996, the remains were sent to the University of Arkansas Department of Anthropology, and they determined that the victim was between 30 and 60 years old, which, you know, I mean, I guess that helps, but that's a pretty wide range. So that's what we had to work with at that point in time. 1998, a composite sketch was done and released, which to me basically looks like an emoji. I don't know, I don't want to get into the artist, you know, their qualifications, but again, that's what we were left with. Which again, this is 24, 25 years ago, so technology was not as great at that point in time. 2008, the remains on this case sent to North Texas, and they again were only able to get a mitochondrial DNA profile. 2016, we conducted a case review on this case. Again, tried to compare dental records, no luck at all on that case. And again, on this case, we met with Othram. Again, shipped the remains from our lab to Othram. And a few months later, October of last year, they were able to develop a profile. In June of this year, they were able to locate a possible relative, but again, this family was unaware of anybody missing in their family. 2022, September, Othram identified an additional relative who we were able to reach out and make contact with. This time, the individual that we spoke with, in fact, confirmed that they were missing a family member since the mid-90s. DNA collected from that individual, compared 1-to-1 with the unidentified victim, and it showed to be a genetic match. So in this case, after 26 years, victim was identified as John Douglas Rollins, Jr., 31-year-old, originally from Missouri, but living in Springdale. Last seen by his family in 1995. So that's kind of a synopsis of the three cases, which kind of brings us to, I guess, the status. What's the status of each case at this point in time? So obviously with Jamie Grow, the information that we got about the two females getting in the van, that's a good lead, which we are following up on. So that case is still active, so we can only release certain aspects of it to you. Donna Sue Nelton, with the information, obviously we feel like we're in a good position to close that case. Obviously we would listen to any information that any of the public has, but we feel like we can close that case out. John Rollins, Jr., obviously not a whole lot of leads at this point in time, but still active. Okay. Like the sheriff had mentioned, you know, our condolences go out to the families. They've all You know, you see this stuff on the news and you see it on paper, but for instance, on the Jamie Grove case, we missed notifying his mother by a year. She lived to be 103, and we just missed her. The case with Donna Sue, you know, her sister basically refused to believe that this could be her. She wanted to believe that she was in the witness protection program, and she basically lived her life going into grocery stores and seeing somebody with the same hairstyle or same eyes and wondering, you know, if that could be her sister. So these victims are not unidentified anymore. They now have a name, which is important to us. You know, and these are not the only cold cases that we have, and we continue to work other cold cases. So other families that are out there that have family members that are victims, you know, just rest assured that we're working on those cases. We can't solve all these cases, but, you know, time proves. You know, who would have thought that 41 years ago? You know, now we know who the victim is, and we're close to solving it. So I think at this point in time, we'd like to open it up for a few questions. And obviously, I'll make myself available later for anybody that's interested in a more in-depth or whatever. But does anybody have any questions at this point in time?
Sure. Now, from what I heard correctly, this wipes this.
And this is for, sorry, this is for the sheriff and the prosecutor as well, if you have any questions.
So if I heard right, this wipes the slate clean of unidentified.
Unidentified, yes.
So what does that mean to the department and to you all that this is now somewhat behind you?
Obviously, I can't be more proud than I am of the work that they've done to get us to the point that we now have no victims that are not identified. That technology is helping us advance on the type of cases we work, but obviously with the hard work and with technology, I'm just happy that we're able to tell citizens of our community that we'll never stop when we have victims in these cases, and this is proof right here. And we're not done with some of these, and we hopefully will have conclusions on all these at some point very soon.
Yes.
Have you found out any information about the two women?
Yes, but we're not going to release that at this point in time due to the integrity of the case.
No.
You know, that's kind of just two women.
Two women.
Leave it at that. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
If you would talk about Othram and.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it seems like without them, we may not be here today.
Right, they were great. They were easy to work with. You know, they generated the leads that helped us get to this point. You know, genetic genealogy is one of those new sciences that, you know, has come to the forefront in the last 2, 3, 4 years. You know, to have that technology on law enforcement side is awesome. You know, you get these tests, you know, through Ancestry or 23andMe, Family Tree, there's a bunch of them. You swab yourself, you send it in, you know, you want to find out who you're related to. We use the same database to find out who the victims are, or in some cases, find out who the suspect is. You can't just go arrest a person based off, we've got a genetic match. Okay, that's a lead. You still have to follow up with the investigation. Okay, and obviously on these cases, we were able to identify the victims. Sheriff said, to my knowledge, these are the only 3 unidentified cases that we had. So.
And how many cases do you have in all?
Including these?
Yes.
7, 8, somewhere around there.
You find it a little bit odd that these families didn't know they had missing people?
So, in one of the cases, the family did file a missing persons report. 2 of the cases, there was never an official missing persons report filed, which, I don't know, it somewhat baffles me, but, you know, especially with all the stories that we've done over the years on TV, but talking to some of these people, not everybody watches TV. And not everybody, sometimes people live in their own little bubble, and there's nothing right or wrong about it, it's just fact. But, yeah, it was a little bit surprising that they weren't listed as missing. In fact, none of the three were in any missing persons database. They weren't in NamUs. They weren't in the Doe Network. They weren't in any of those missing persons databases, which is part of why initially we couldn't match up the unidentified with known missing persons. So,
And I guess how will it be difficult now it's been so long to try to find these people and find people who remember what they were doing back then?
well, yes and no. Like, obviously on the Jamie Grow case, we've identified a couple of females. Now, Nathan can probably answer to this better than me, but any time passes, especially 41 years, that makes it more difficult to not necessarily find out what happened, but in a lot of cases, it makes it very difficult to prosecute that case. But it's not going to stop us from going forward. Nathan, I don't know, you might have something that.
Well, clearly, there's no statute of limitations on murder. Generally, the longer a case goes, the more difficult it becomes for the state to charge it. But that's not to say that it couldn't be, right? If we had, evidence that came out today, we'd pursue it like any other case and go forward with it. I think, to me, the real credit to Lieutenant Petray, Sheriff Hall, and the Sheriff's Office is that regardless of what happens with these down the road, I think he said it very well, and is that it's important for these victims to have a name and for them not to just be a body somewhere. So that is so important. I think not only for them and for their memory, for their families, but also for our community to know that their law enforcement officers care about these cases, even if they happened 30 and 40 years ago. So certainly it is difficult after the fact. People's memories fade over time. But, oftentimes you will talk with witnesses who, remember 30 years ago like it was yesterday, or you get a good piece of evidence. And so if we do, we'll pursue it.
So with that, how aggressively do you go after it compared to everything else that's happening?
Sure. Well, look, I think you have to just follow the evidence where it leads you, right? And so if we have a good lead in this case, we'll pursue it. I can tell you if tomorrow we had the opportunity to talk with a witness and be helpful, we would do that. We're not going to not do something on the case simply because they're old. It really is going to depend on what is the quality of the evidence that can come in. And my hope is, as I'm sitting here listening to this, is that when we put these pictures on TV and they get out, that someone may remember something from a long time ago. That's going to be very important because clearly to this point there hasn't been any piece of evidence that came in before we identified these bodies that was allowed us to identify them. Now that they have been identified, my hope certainly is that someone will have some lead, some piece of information that can be critical for these guys going forward.
This is sort of that cornerstone of the puzzle you have to have.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And listen, that's why you see so many times around the country, you'll see even when law enforcement does believe they have had a homicide, they have to locate the body first, right? It's possible to go forward without a body, but nearly impossible. It's very rarely done. It has been done occasionally, but oftentimes you're trying to get that because there's so much evidence maintained there that you have to have. So, when you look at these, it's really the first step forward that you have to have, and it opens up so many more doors going forward, like Lieutenant Petray was saying.
One other thing I will say, this is 3 cases in one county. So I'm hoping with others seeing this story in law enforcement in our area and throughout that they'll be able to get some closure on thousands of cases that exist out there just like this. 3 just being in one county. I'd say there's probably thousands just in our state. So.
I know NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified System, basically and it goes back to the 70s, but there's over 14,000 unidentified victims out there. And obviously that's not all of them. That's the ones that have been entered into the database. But I think there's something like 800 a year new unidentified victims. But the DNA technology's there. If these agencies will use it, they can close a lot of these cases.
Just to humor us real quick, sometimes different people look at the video and they don't know who's who here, so if you would just go through and identify name and how the title should appear on camera.
Sure.
Even though
Lieutenant
they may know. Go ahead.
Hunter Petray,
Spell your last name?
Petray.
Sheriff Sean Holloway, Holloway, for the last name.
I'm Nathan Smith. I'm the prosecuting attorney. Anybody need me to smell Smith or?
Common spelling.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Are these for them?
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, we have some fobs up here too, if you guys want this information.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Drew. Hey, so, when you said there was,